If Judy or Sadie can let me know that it's working. It's good. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're good to go.
Well, good morning and welcome to Audit Committee meeting today. Today is Thursday, December 4th, 2025. Time is 10:36. At this time, I'd like to call the meeting, call the order, the meeting of the Audit Committee. And you do attendance rolls, please, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. We have all members present except for Dr. Thomas, who let us know ahead of time that she wouldn't be here today. So we do have a quorum.
All right. Thank you, sir. And with that said, hopefully everybody had the opportunity to review the minutes. Now I give us a few minutes of the October 2nd, 2025 meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay.
There was one that I saw one small correction, but you might have already done it. So that I had this the name of our manager was Powell earlier in the thing, but he might have changed it, corrected it to
Oh no, I see it. It's right there on the first page,
okay.
Second to last line. Yeah, we'll correct that. Sorry.
One, yeah.
Sorry, Manager Cal.
I'll never hold that against you.
Okay. I said, I wonder if he was related to, and then I
We
realized that's not right.
Certainly make that correction if y'all are still good with approval.
Yes. Who did these minutes? They did a great job. They're really.
That was actually our intern that did it this time.
Really, really good job.
Yeah.
It really captured it very well.
Can I get a second on the minutes?
Second.
Okay, thank you. It's been motion by Commissioner Myers, second by Dr. Higgins. For the minute with the one correction, the manager's Cow's name from Powell to Cow. All in favor? In objection. At this time, we'll start with item number D, FY26 work plan status and activities.
All right, thank you, Chair. So we're going to revisit first the investigative audit of the organizational structure. If you'll recall, we talked about this at length at the last meeting in October. There was some good discussion. In between then and now, we were able to sit down with Commissioner Myers to go over some edits in our office. We also received the email from Ms. Higgins and made those edits. And so I think the document that you have in front of you is pretty well amended to reflect some of the concerns of the committee, at least to the greatest degree that we could, especially with some graphic design stuff, just trying to fit stuff on pages. And I realize fully that it's hard to read at times, but did our best to amend those. But certainly if y'all have any questions about the document itself or any concerns over the edits made, now's the time. We certainly look for a vote if possible today to keep this on track for the mayor and commission's December-January cycle of activities. So
yeah,
You got questions?
I don't have a question actually. That was good that you reminded me that I talked to you, because I was like, it was so long ago. I was like, oh well, I guess they took care of it. I said, I'm like, Beth probably talked about those things. I said I didn't follow up, but I did. This is a very minor thing, but because it's on page 30, I was reading this morning, and it was confusing to me. It's just one. This is very minor. The use of the word "however."
okay.
And where's on page 30 when you're talking about making bid?
Okay, the
Says,
third paragraph.
however, yeah, making with the 3 higher education institutions, blah, blah, the county shares similarities with ACC and it's student driven. However, making bid must also contend with significant socioeconomic challenges, including a poverty rate of 24.47 and the median household income of 50, whatever. I thought those were similar to Athens-Clarke County. I mean, so that it implied that somehow they had an extra burden, when I thought, isn't our poverty rate pretty close to that and our median household income close to that?
It's not too far off. I mean, it is I think the however was just to highlight that there is some difference, but I mean, I see where you're coming from, that it could give more emphasis than needed possibly to
Yeah, I
the
mean,
differences.
it's very minor,
Sure.
but it was just like, it threw me off. I would have put, in addition, they also contend with significant, so.
I mean,
that's
we can certainly
just- Yeah, that's,
change that. Okay.
cause we do, struggle with the poverty rate as well, low median household income.
Speaking of that though, and it may not mean a lot, but having with the people from the chamber, do you all know we got 14,000 available jobs within the Northeast Georgia region and good paying jobs. So I always ask the question, why are not some of those jobs not getting filled? And then that's one of the quickest ways for people to get out of poverty, and we can get those jobs. And maybe they may have to come with training, but there's some good paying jobs here. And hopefully we can maybe start promoting that more. I say that to the chamber.
Continuing off topic here, I would say, having worked with students at Athens-Tech for years and years, that I am doing a lot of workforce development. It was the fact that our employees they're not like, I had so many students who were in remedial classes, even though they had they had a high school diploma. So when we would have employees come in and talk to us, they would talk about people not having the basic reading, writing, math, and employability skills that they needed to get some of these jobs. And that, I think, continues to be a problem, and so the jobs are there, might be there, but the skills, and that's why I often, when I hear about economic development coming into the county and how this is going to help, I'm like, it's not going to help unless that bridge between the people who need jobs or better paying jobs and the skills needed, and whatever needed for those jobs match up a little bit more. So that's my 2 cents off the topic of the audit.
One of that thing will be, as we move forward, to work really close with our school district and with those. And I always tell people the career academy that we have, we're one of the best kept secrets. And I hope we'll continue to get more and more students to go through those programs. And if and when those opportunities become available, they have a skill set to do it. So,
Well, and I think the conversation does though play into the overall topic at hand of the audit with regard to what we saw and observed in looking at the structure. There are certainly those positions within ACC Gov, when you look at all the org charts, that are entry level, obviously, and that when tied with our previous audit of the Human Resources Department in terms of recruitment and hiring, I think there's certainly some room for improvement and to re-examine how we get people in the door at those entry level positions and then train them internally to be able to move upwards within the organization. And I think that this whole audit also is predicated on the fact that succession planning, continuity of operations are key in this government as we go forward. So I think it is a relevant
It's kind of an interesting point. I mean, not that I want to go evaluate the sort of the entry level and sort of lower ranking in terms of skill set jobs, but how much we could be doing, I'll put it this way, whether there are opportunities to increase the basic skill levels or an interest in that of some of our employees, as an example to the rest of the community and good for the organization. So that's just an interesting point.
I do have one question. We'll read some of this. I still can't figure out, when the charter first came, it was the Human and Economic Development Department. I was trying to figure out, when was the Economic Development taken out?
It was around the 2013 time when we used to have the Economic Development Foundation. If you'll recall, it was a sort of a quasi separate organization. It wasn't the chamber, it wasn't Athens-Clarke County, it was a separate foundation that did our economic development tasks similar to what our department does right now. And there was a time around 2013 when we decided to bring those functions in-house. And as a result of that, in creating a department that now had the word economic development in the title, we basically took it away from housing and they became housing and community development and just lost the term economic.
So to that point, and if I didn't, unless I missed it, so was that a commission-driven decision? Was that a mayor? See, that's what I was trying to get at, because normally, because that department was created, it was charter-based. So I was trying to figure out how that move was made. Was it commission-driven? Was it mayor-driven?
It would have had to have been, I don't know who drove the actual cause of it, but ultimately it would have landed in front of the mayor and commission, because essentially we created new department, changed the department, had to add positions, creating an economic development. I mean, there were budget amendments that had to take place during that.
If I, you know, I don't want to give y'all no more work, but I'd like to know, I like to see that and how that happened.
Sure.
Because I think it actually has been sort of a talk within the community that, and again, a lot of people found out was somewhat surprised because, again, one of the attractions to get the charter passed was to have the human housing, even development as we went. So that's why I'm anxious to find out how that happened. Was the action mayor and commission driven, or somebody just made a decision?
Okay. I mean, I think we can certainly work with the manager's office to get you some of that information. Like anecdotally,
Right, yeah,
I mean, I don't know if it
don't do anything, but it has been talk among the community that, you know, that was separated. It seems like some people missed it.
And it's pretty, I would say it's probably more customary to have economic development and community development as separate. Usually because in most communities, certainly entitlement communities, community development's focus is predominantly on managing HUD funding. It just tends to be, and it's very, very different than what economic development is working on. At the same time, it's also fairly customary that even when you have a standalone economic development, which most municipalities would, you also would have the equivalent of what was the economic development foundation here. It's pretty typical that you would have some kind of public-private partnership focused on economic development that we really don't have. The chamber is the closest thing we have here. So yeah, I too would be somewhat interested to know kind of what some of the discussion was and why it's probably less confusing to me, I guess, why, you know, they would have separated it from community development as much as why did they also decide that the foundation was no longer needed or something.
That's a good point, because again, you know, as we all know, and Carol, you work there, Athens-Clarke have their own economic development deal going on. And then of course the chamber in some form or fashion does too. So I think, you know.
It's usually closer to what you would, for example, Gwinnett County, I think, has kind of they have both an internal economic development and they have this broader regional kind of public-private partnership focus. That's much more typical of what you would see. We don't have that here.
So I do think too, to clarify as well, like there certainly was a change in the name. The change in the name, though, I don't think completely eliminated what was being done prior by that department, because if you look at the org chart even today, in the appendix, there is a division within housing and community development called housing and economic development. They still do the economic development functions that are related to HUD and CDBG and things like that, which is what they were always doing. I think they just clarified the name itself. And the thing that economic development department took over was actually what the foundation was doing. I don't even know if there was a swap from what community and economic development used to be doing. I think it's the same thing. They just changed the name essentially and brought the foundation in-house.
I think that's a good distinction because the economic development work that was being done in the combined, if you will, department was not what you and I would think of as economic development. It was really implementing the HUD funded or the CDBG funded portion of economic development.
And then actually kind of looking at the two missions here and tying that into a panel discussion I was on last night, makes, and some work I was doing prior to that on looking at affordable housing. Like when I'm looking at the mission of the HCD, and you just said, well, primarily they deal with HUD funds, right? So, and it has actually 3 parts, but that, I'm kind of wondering as a commissioner leader here, that this is how much of the focus, is the focus like is 95% on managing the funds. And you could say that the second and third part fosters and coordinates services for disadvantaged population and promotes economic mobility among residents. Those are sort of subsumed into the HUD, which, because sometimes when I'm looking at like the affordable housing, and like I was looking at our materials online, it was like the materials are presented as funding sources rather than mission. Like, here's what we're trying to do, and here's how we're like, so that if you're coming, so here I am 5 years into this, like catching on to the fact that it's organized around the funding.
Yeah.
Rather than
Best example of that in the organization is our capital SPLOST. We call it the SPLOST, have called it historically the SPLOST department, which is a funding source,
Yeah.
not a mission, not even a focus. And yeah,
Right.
I think to your point, if I was putting percentages, I would say 90+% of the effort in HCD is managing federal funds. Inside that 90% effort, I would say 90% of that effort is in affordable housing, followed by community development. So think of like sidewalks and occasionally that are CDBG funded, and economic development. That will evolve with their responsibilities of, say, for example, the housing fund, the affordable housing fund. And I think you'll see their emphasis grow on the non-HUD funding because there's new funding sources that didn't exist previously.
Yeah, and their focus, like you just mentioned, I think that's how you distinguish between the two. The easiest is within HCD, it's about economic mobility.
Right, it's
within
people.
Economic development, it's about attraction, construction, development, things like that. Yeah.
And I think part of it, again, I had just moved here and I got involved when I had to do unification. Part of that economic development piece was to help communities, stuff bring and some businesses, help community with inside themselves to promote economic development within those communities that may be lacking, those type of things. So that was part of the rationale as part of when they were putting the charter together to make sure certain neighborhoods had some type of economic development attracted to their particular neighborhoods.
The problem that seems to be though is who is in charge of economic development?
Yeah, and here is, well, it also depends. That was a great answer, right? It always depends. It is locally, I would say, it focuses through the Department of Economic Development. So when we think of things like what we're doing locally to try to grow the economy, now I think there are exceptions to that. So for example, one of the things that I've identified over the first 100+ days is downtown has largely been turned over to the Downtown Development Authority. So when it comes to downtown economic development, you would say, okay, they're kind of.
I don't mean any disrespect. That's the problem right there.
Yes, and it gets even more. It gets even more complicated
because there should be a 10-second answer to that. This is in charge of economic development for the entirety of the county. And
it gets even worse because another level, use Meisner as an example, that actually is driven predominantly by the state. And so the state is actually kind of dictating more or less what kinds of large economic development projects will be brought to us.
Because look, we talk about everything having to do with government in this building, in this particular room, but coming from Southern Georgia, and I'm very much acquainted with this, if there are no jobs, none of this matters. It's over and your community starts to die. Now, obviously we have university, so we doubt that's going away.
And we have those jobs that Dexter was just referring to.
True.
Yeah.
But we have to continue to grow, obviously, the economy of this area. And to go back to what Dexter says, there always seems to be this worry. I know it's not just limited to Athens about the county government doing too much related to the school system. But I'll never forget, it's probably 10 years ago now, at an economic development forum here in Athens. The person that was leading it stood up there, and the first thing out of his mouth, and it was kind of weird because it was like he had just had a conversation about this and was sick of hearing it. But he said, we have got to stop denigrating public education in this state. And that, I think that's something we worry about when we talk about education, that you think, oh, this is all about just making little workers and little robots, and everybody's thinking about the Pink Floyd song. But the bottom line is this: they have to be able to do a job.
Right.
The students coming out of, and to your point, a vast portion of them can't. They don't have the rudimentary skills to do these jobs, and that's a problem, a huge problem.
Yeah, and it's an issue, an economic mobility issue for them, and it's an economic development issue for the community. And the
Correct.
region, because you're not going to attract new jobs to a community that that doesn't have a workforce.
Right.
And let's be honest, you know, just like with affordable housing and homelessness and everything else, this is not a problem that is just exists in Athens.
Oh, yeah, for sure, you're right, yeah, it's a nationwide problem.
It's a nationwide problem, right? I mean, it's a problem that, well, you know, it's not just our problem. That doesn't mean we shouldn't address it, but we shouldn't think that we're like doing something wrong, or our schools are doing something wrong, or this or that. Like let's push
You know,
forward.
if anything, we're lucky. I mean, you go to other parts of this country, and they're far dire straits.
Oh,
than we
yeah.
are.
We was in a meeting, I'm not trying to go down a rabbit hole, I was in a meeting on Tuesday morning, the mayor was there, some other people on community leaders were there, and it was personal though, everybody talked about why they're here, why they love this community so much, but also is we don't tell our story enough. I'm convinced that we don't do that. We don't do a very good job. School district doesn't, the county doesn't. We don't tell the story. We do some great things here. There's some great stuff going on. You know, we hear about all the negative stuff, but I think we need to really push our greater community this, and to your point, Carl, how fortunate to have what we got here. It ain't no, and Carrie, to your point, there's nothing perfect, and everybody around the country is dealing with those things, but I'm glad I live here. I don't want to live anywhere else.
Right.
So I think it's important though that we promote some of those good things that we're doing. And I tell people, and I've said this to Dr. Scott, I said Dr. Thomas, she would tell you when I worked there. Clarke County School District got more AP courses than any school in Northeast Georgia, both high schools, where you can get those AP classes and get those higher classes. But they don't say that. No. You know, we got all these AP classes for our students to really excel. We got a great career in it, but we don't say that. So I'm gonna get out my house.
Well, no, but I think
Again,
no.
get out my house. But I just think we just don't do enough to promote our community.
Yeah, but if I may
Yeah.
also say that we've audited both HCD and economic development. And that was actually one of our observations about HCD, was that the economic development role of the department can be a source of confusion, perhaps due to the part of economic development is in the title of at least 4 other agencies, divisions, departments of ACC Gov since unification. So it's gone to all these other places. And to Mr. Blunt's point, in our economic development audit, what it says in code and charter is, in the code of ordinance, is that the economic development department is to be the primary point of contact for industries, large commercial developments, site location consultants, and state economic development organizations interested in developing, expanding, or locating new or expanded business. So to your point, I mean, it says it is to be the primary point of contact. It doesn't necessarily say to guide or to lead or whatnot. So
Well, and I think then to Commissioner Fisher's point, just about telling the story, that's one thing you'll find in this audit. There is a section about unified branding for this organization and how, I mean, it can be as technical as we just all need to start using the same logo in every department, to telling more of our story as an organization. So that, I think all of that is encompassed and captured in this audit.
Yeah. It's very, very helpful. But speaking of telling the story, I'll tie it into that, and I'll just ask you as a question. Back in these wonderful charts in the back are really, really helpful. Did you guys discuss at all putting all the stuff having to do with the courts together? Like, you know, because it's all in alphabetical order. I'm just saying,
well.
I mean, I forget that the order that it follows, like whether it's all just alphabetical overall. It's
It
just
is,
okay.
it's not with the, separated by judicial functions versus
functions,
managerial,
because
yeah.
I only see this is just very selfish. I can do this myself, but the story isn't there that well. I mean, I have before I became a commissioner, COVID times, because it was all in COVID. It was like me and Commissioner Hool and one of a local attorney like did this tutorial online where I was putting all this stuff on a big piece of paper. I still have it in my office to understand the court system and how the pieces went together because I couldn't figure it out. And I am still, I'm not, it's not something I interact with all the time, but this was very helpful. It was like, oh, I'm going to make copies of these and put them on my wall there to get it together. Because it's very, I think the court system, this is an aside and it's not that important, but in terms of the story of them all being together, perhaps it's all on the website of the court system somewhere, but that's been a challenge, but I appreciated them all being in here. That was very helpful for them to be in there.
I do think it speaks to probably one of the main sort of, I'm going to call it finding. I know they're not findings here, but one of the main findings that that Gavin and his team found, which was this still not realizing the full benefit of the unification, which is in large part because the courthouse and the courts really exist and function not much different than they did pre-unification. And part of that goes to, do people within the organization and certainly within the community even understand how that's all structured and how it actually relates to the rest of the ACC Gov. So I do think actually understanding how they're structured, how they do relate to the rest of it, what services they actually derive from the rest of the organization actually is important, because it is one of those things that there is still that, it's almost as if there's the ACC Gov and the courthouse.
Right. And then, I mean, back to your role here too, it's sort of like, okay, no, I mean, in reality, like, what is your interaction? Is it really only about facilities?
Well, it's mainly, and it mainly should be and is about really systems and process and facilities. So things, for example, that are highlighted in here are things like having our HR system, for example, should be uniform across the entirety of ACC Gov to the extent that's legally possible. It shouldn't matter whether you're in the courthouse or whether you're over here, and that's not always the case. Our purchasing processes, our IT process, all of those should be seamless, and they're not.
So it's sort of because they were always part of the county to begin with when unification happened. It was just like, oh, well, they've been all acting for themselves. Let's just keep them acting and we'll interact.
And they're much more directly an extent of the state than
right.
So you always have that weirdness too, that you're trying to balance their state employees, there's elected officials, how do you fit? So my focus is really, where do you find facilities and systems that shouldn't make any difference, that should be uniform across the whole. And there's still room, I think, significant room to make progress on the efficiency that the unified government was supposed to yield in those capacities. You're always going to have people that are state employees that are elected. You're not going to be able to, can't separate those.
Yeah, and I think that's, although I agree completely that just a uniform court org chart would certainly be beneficial, I think the point that we were trying to make is, at the end of the day, the court system, although it may function that way historically, it is part of this government, and its employees are part of this government. The budget is, the facilities, the equipment, those are all things that are not in a silo, even though I think historically they've been treated as such. And we wanted to bring that back to reality, that they are part of this organization. So that's why their charts are all in here.
Why are they treated that way?
Well, I think again, historically, you have all of those functions that have operated in a building by itself, that, like, physically it is by itself. And I know that sounds weird, but I mean, literally, that is
largely occupied by people who are either elected or appointed by the state. But the positive part of it is, I will say, my interactions with the judges and with the senior staff there is, there is a definite desire to be more of that, more of, how do we actually work together? How do we actually have this unified kind of approach than I've seen in other places? There's definitely other places where it's sort of like, we're over on our own. we never want to have any kind of interaction. I don't pick that vibe up,
No.
but I also don't think anybody's really driven that.
But what, I mean, I guess ultimately though, in terms of efficiency and everything else, I mean, what would I mean, there's nice to get everything in the same systems, but like, maybe it's not worth the effort sometimes if someone else has a good system for doing IT or something or other, right? And it's all working, why do this change? So is there anything that they want? I mean, why would they, I mean, they're just being rather than
Yeah, I think
defensive, but is there
and
anything?
it's true, that's true even within the departments that even reside inside our
Mhm.
buildings, if you will, that, you still have to balance. Yes, we want, for example, a uniform system on how we approach technology, let's say, for example, but then there's the reality that the software that fleet needs is going to be different than the software that accounting needs. And so you still have to make those you would still have that with the courthouse. I think where you gain the efficiencies and where I think there is an interest is actually around consistency, so that there's a consistent way in which we approach hiring, recruiting, discipline, how we maintain our facilities. Those are things that they're interested in, we're interested in, and actually I think is what ultimately the voters were interested in when they did unification, which was, how do you actually gain those efficiencies and that consistency? That's where I think there's interest on their part.
Such
Yeah,
interesting.
it is, and hats off, guys. This is fascinating
Yeah.
stuff. And again, I hadn't read the whole thing, but certain things that I went to that I want to, explore. And I hope once our colleagues get it on the commission, take a deep dive and maybe Carol, I'll throw this out. Maybe just on this piece, maybe there might be a work session. Okay. I'll talk about the organization.
Yeah, and it was definitely helpful, as I said last time. It was very helpful to me as I've kind of gone through my initial review of the organization. This was a good piece, both from a historical perspective, but also kind of a comparison to others. So it's been helpful with that. And and I do think if we progress to some kind of work session, it would dovetail well with kind of some of the observations that I have in some of the pieces.
Right.
It kind of fits well together.
Well, maybe I'll suggest that to the mayor.
Well, I'll make a motion to go ahead and vote and approve, recommend, what's the right word for this? What are we doing?
Recommend approval or acceptance. Sorry.
Recommend acceptance, a vote to, right, I'm making a motion to accept this. That's what we're doing.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, there's been a motion put on the floor by Commissioner Myers, second by Dr. Higgins to accept the organizational structure FY 26 investigative audit. All in favor? Aye. And opposed? Again, thank you, team.
Yeah.
Great work.
Yeah, it was really good. It was really good.
Moving on to the next one in your packet. This is not something that necessarily needs a formal vote. This is just a follow-up memo that will eventually, if you're satisfied with it, we'll email directly the mayor and commission. But it was time for our 1-year follow-up from the HR audit. And that was specifically on employee recruitment, hiring, and orientation. And so what you have in front of you is a memo that we will eventually send to the mayor and commission, as well as a spreadsheet that highlighted all of the audit's recommendations and findings, and then included the original response from the department and management, as well as the 1-year follow-up response and status update. And so certainly willing to take any questions on that. But one thing I will just point out to you in highlights is on the last page is sort of the summary, where we put in one big chart the summary response, and that basically shows the 26 recommendations that were made overall, and sort of our observations coupled with what the response was from HR. And of the 26,
Yeah, in a few minutes.
yes,
Which one are we looking at?
Way at the end, way at the end.
yeah, the last page there.
17.
Have a color copy. I'll give you.
That's what, don't worry about it, because I look at it.
There you go. Yes, sir.
Page 17.
Sorry about that.
Yep, 17 to 17. Yeah. So of the 26 listed there, 12 ultimately were not pursued by the department. 8 have been completed according to their input, and 6 are still in progress.
So I went back to look at, the original responses, and most of the recommended not pursued were ones that they either partially disagree with or disagree with to begin with, and a lot of it had to do with their technology and the synchronization of their efforts. And so my assumption is with this review to the manager is that you will look at that closely and see if these are things, now it goes from the audit to the execution on how you feel about the direction of human resources in
Yeah, and I would
response to
say
their.
too, what complicated, and Gavin knows this because we've had this conversation both at the time that the follow-up was presented and then separately too, is that, there's a number of things that are factoring into this. The director that responded to this is not the current HR director. And because one of my comments to Gavin was I was quite surprised at how many instances of disagreement there were, which is unusual. And so I don't know how much of that had to do with personalities with it at the time. There definitely have been some technology changes that I think both remove some of these, but also offer some opportunities as well. So yes, I've actually already started going through kind of the findings with Gavin and with HR. And I think there are some things that we definitely would be approaching differently than we did before. And I even questioned listening I sat in on the follow-up meeting and even listening to the responses, I really even questioned the total kind of comprehension of what the comments were by the staff, because I think the director was actually the one responding at the time. So I think there's a lot of room to actually take what's in this, regardless of what the response is, and actually move forward with some of their ideas and options with that. So yeah, I think there's some, even though some of it was tied to technology, there are still some opportunities to do things that maybe perhaps in the past we disagreed with that we still need to be moving forward with.
I would suggest here, just so we remember it, even for the title of this great chart here, but to put that this was a comprehensive of the employee recruitment, hiring, and orientation.
Sure.
Because otherwise it's going to get lost in here that that's not the focus of it. Historically, when someone's looking at this 25 years down the road.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, and I'll just give you one really quick, just trick in my mind here, one really quick anecdotal example of what I was just saying, which is, if I recall correctly, y'all have to help me make sure I get this correct, but there was a finding that had to do with the total list of candidates for a position being forwarded to the hiring group or the hiring person within the department. And one of the responses back was, in effect, that HR is by ordinance defined, they're the ones selected to make that determination of who's qualified to move forward, which is true, that's accurate. And so therefore, their position that was previously taken was these not only shouldn't be moved forward, but can't be moved forward. And I think the position was, no, there needs to be a way in which the hiring director has the ability to say, I want to peer into those that HR had deemed unqualified to see if I agree with that piece of it or not, and would want to pull any of those forward, especially as we move, as job recruitment moves further and further away from explicits, must have a 4-year degree, must have 3 years of experience, and moves more toward, we've all seen them, must have these things or an equivalent competency in whatever. It becomes more judgmental. That's an example where I think, they were relying way too heavy on a really very narrow view of what was in the ordinance. It didn't prevent them from doing it, just gave them that first charge. And where I think the current group is more receptive to that idea than the past group was. So that I just use that as an example.
No, and I would agree with that. And I think that was ultimately the comment that was generated back a year ago, was that from our standpoint, we weren't questioning the fact that HR has a say in who legally can be moved forward throughout the system, especially when it comes to some of those very objective things like you do or do not have a degree, you do or do not have a driver's license, things that are very cut and dry. I think we're in talking with some of the department directors during the course of that audit was more of the subjective things that Bob was highlighting of, well, when it comes to your background in finance management. Okay, you may have explained it in your application to a degree that HR says, no, that doesn't qualify. Whereas the department director may say, well, actually, I disagree, that does qualify in my opinion. And I would like to not eliminate a huge pool of candidates that way. I would like to see which ones actually said in their response these key words, because that's something I think I should have a conversation with the HR director about. So it was just at least opening that door versus the automatic, you're not included in the pool of candidates. So
And I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
And again, I think there's more receptivity to that now
Mhm.
among the HR leadership than there was previously.
any other questions though on sort of a follow-up to HR? And we will certainly add that title to it, Commissioner Myers, as well, before we send it on to the mayor commission. Okay?
In my words, however,
it's okay.
title.
She's the wordsmith.
If there aren't any, we will email that. We don't need a vote, but we will email that on to the mayor commission. Okay. If I may, Chair, move down to the next one. We don't have anything for you today. We hope to have it for you at your next meeting, but we are wrapping up at the moment, actually. Today, is the periodic audit of the capital projects department. So we've been working on that for the past few months. We're putting the finishing touches on the report right now and have meetings scheduled over the next 2 weeks before the holiday with both management and the department itself. And so you all will be notified of that once the report is done and in the management department's hands, and the 30-day review period begins. So keep an eye out for that, but we are wrapping that up as well. So
And you all know that this is a companion to the effort that we've shared with you at a couple of different work sessions that Josh has been working on, which is more process oriented. This is more internal focused, is more pride. And the idea is to merge the two of those together so that at the outset, probably February-ish timeframe, we'll be coming back to you all again with, here is our new delivery system for capital. And with the goal being faster delivery, and in some ways, I think more effective delivery too. That I don't want it to be just viewed as, hey, we eliminated things so we can be faster. I think we've eliminated things so we can be faster, and the things that we kept, we're trying to set the stage where they can be done better.
and with that in mind, please, as you get the email with the copy of the report, sort of around the holiday season, feel free to email us any of your questions ahead of time. Obviously, this board has the right to hold anything or to another meeting, but we'll probably present this to you in February. If you'd like, we'll try to get it on track for the February-March cycle of the mayor and commission. Bob indicated to sort of piggyback off of process improvements. But yeah, if you have any questions in between now and then, let us know. So just look for that in the coming weeks. All right. Chair, we're ready for the next one, I think. E.
Yeah, work plan,
Yes, so
preparation.
again, nothing decisive today. We wanted to at least, again, in our efforts to sort of move up the timetable and prepare each year accordingly and have staff and everything ready to go by the time the fiscal year starts, get you started on next year's work plan. I know that may seem pretty early, but I understand that we'll probably come back, talk about it in February, may even have to, talk about it again in March and maybe vote in March, but at least you can get looking at some of the preliminary documents. The matrix that you're accustomed to sort of lists in no order the topics that have been brought forward for next year. And this was generated by, yes, and that matches what's listed at the top in that chart there, those 10 or 11. Yep.
Yeah.
So that was generated by request to the mayor and commission. It was also a discussion Bob and I had a couple weeks ago. This also is generated from either past audits that didn't make the final cut over the years in front of y'all, as well as staff observations throughout the year. So those are sort of the 11 that came to be. That is not a final list. Obviously, we are still looking for y'all's input, which may or may not include some of the items that are on there. You may have separate ones. If you do we would just ask that you start to email those to us in the coming weeks so that we can put those in the chart and create sort of a scope and objective with that. But ultimately, we'll put that all in the matrix the way it is, score them. The score is certainly significant, but it's not the end all. And we'll have to obviously whittle that down as we typically do to something more manageable for FY27. But that will be based on which audits y'all are sort of looking at, the time duration to complete those audits, the complexity, things like that. So
one of the things to keep in mind too, I think, as you do that and try to sort of prioritize those, if you will. And Gavin, I've talked a little bit about this, and I've begun sharing this with commissioners as we're meeting. Is inside here, there's a couple of those audits that kind of are at least top 11 or so in there that are part of my findings to keep it simple. Where I've shared with many of you, it's like, I think we have there's too many departments. Some of those need to be collapsed into others. That was partly due to the effort of rolling out what were offices in the manager's office out into departments. Some of those I think need to be revisited. So there's a few of those that are in here that have kind of come up to say, hey, these might be worth an organizational assessment as a part of it. That will also be on my list as I'm not sure these need to stay as departments, that they may need to actually be reconsidered, their mission rolled into somebody else's, not the people being rolled over, not the change of their focus, just where they're embedded inside the organization. So two of them immediately come to mind are people belonging in organizational development, for example. And those both show up on this list. So just keep that in mind as you're kind of thinking about prioritizing those. That either will raise them in priority or it'll lower them because we may be talking about them in another way.
Yeah. Yeah, these scores are certainly preliminary. These are subject to change based on what Bob mentioned as well as your input. A couple things that I do want to just point out for your consideration as you consider that first group of 11. TPW and Central certainly were on the list the last time, and I think, they are significant departments, significant budgets, and both worthy of eventual audit. I think realistically, we'd be able to do one next year, not both. And we could certainly forward the next one to the following year. I mean, that's not going to be a problem, but just from a staff capacity standpoint, I think the two of the largest departments in the government.
TPW and Central Service?
Yes, if it's the ultimate choice of this group, I don't think both would happen in one fiscal year. When it comes to animal services, one thing I do want to point out is that audit was actually done in 2021 under the previous auditor, to the point where a report was generated and ultimately I think even got to the point where it had comments from management on the findings and recommendations. It just stopped at that point. It was not ultimately accepted by the mayor and commission because it never got to that level for various reasons. But I would just keep that in mind, and that's reflected in the scoring, is that although it may not have been accepted, that work was done, it was complete, there were recommendations made, the director of that department is well aware of those recommendations, and I think honestly has already taken those into account going forward over the couple of years. So it may or may not be necessary to try and redo that again when it was, for the most part, almost entirely done. Tax commissioner, municipal court, and clerk of commission topics, a lot of those are driven by the changes in transition of leadership. So that's one thing that we always keep in mind as a department, is that one of the industry best practices is when you do have a transition from a director to a new director or something along those lines, that is a standard, is to go ahead and perform an audit to see what had been going on in preparation for what could be going on. And so those didn't necessarily score high in terms of risk, but at the same time, they're on there because they have undergone recent changes in leadership, and it may be an opportune time to go ahead and perform an audit while they
Which other ones? That was the
so that was tax commissioner having, clerk of commission, and then municipal court judge that just took office in the summertime. Real quickly, code enforcement was up there as well and suggested, primarily for some of its equity in terms of like enforcement around the county, geographically, how is it enforcing codes, what kind of populations, what kind of communities, things like that. Again, we are happy to perform an audit. That's not our concern. My concern though is if the expectation is on equity of code enforcement based on demographics, for example. I don't know if that information honestly exists because I don't believe our code enforcement goes out with every enforcement citation and records demographic information on the people that are receiving tickets. So, I mean, I just want to set the expectations that although we are happy to perform that audit, I don't know if there will be a result that clearly indicates, okay, a certain sector of the population is being ticketed more often than the other. I don't think that data.
But I think there's, I mean, other,
Ways to assess them.
right, and there's other aspects of that, so the type of,
Sure.
of code that's being enforced, how often, time on a certain thing, so.
Yes,
I
I certainly think there is a geographical component that could be done. I just want to set the expectation though that there will likely not be, one can infer from the results of geography how that balance is happening. It's not going to be for us though to concretely say without data,
Right.
this sector of a population based on either race, age, gender, whatever is being.
Yeah, and I don't know
Yeah.
what comments
Okay.
you're referring to,
Sure.
so that's not.
Yeah,
there, but
yeah.
but I do know that, I mean, in terms of code enforcement, that is something that, the public interacts with.
Sure.
And so even having the confidence from this side that we've looked at it and,
Mhm.
Maybe everything's great. And that would be good to know, right?
Just, obviously you have some descriptions in there as well that accompany this chart that sort of set an initial tone of what the audit would entail, whether it's a periodic or a comprehensive, sort of some scope. It also lists the last time there was an audit, if ever, and all of those factors are taken into account in the risk assessment. One column that has been added this year that I think was very important, and we've assessed a scoring number to it, is audit history. And so essentially, if someone has never had an audit, that raises the score level. If someone had one in the last 10 years or greater than 10 years, we've put that into the chart now as well.
Okay.
So are there any questions that you sort of begin to think about that? Any topics or departments that are just right off the bat on something that is of interest to you that you don't see on this chart?
Is there anything that, is in terms of you getting input from the commission,
Mhm.
also the manager, maybe, I don't know who else, in terms of actual.
So the ordinance is clear in the fact that as far as input, for sure, mayor and commission, for sure, work with the manager, and then obviously staff observations throughout the
So
year.
is there anything in this matrix that indicates whether something was of more concern to more commissioners than?
No.
You just mentioned code enforcement, like, I don't know if that's, or, what is
Well-
organizational development? I don't know if that's like one person put it down there or 6 people or,
Sure.
or.
No, there's not a metric necessarily of how popular a topic was amongst the commission, but I will say that when you look at public perception is one of our fields, as well as community impact, and then the mayor and commission strategic plan. Those are ways in which I think we can also capture some of that weight. But no, I mean, and I think at the end of the day too, it's at least when we're talking about a risk assessment here where there's supposed to be an objective scoring, I wouldn't want to introduce something that is basically popular by demand,
Right, right.
type of
Well, yeah.
thing.
But I
If
think,
it's-
Commissioner Myers, you remember when I think we was asked, one thing we suggested to Bob before you got hired was, what were some of the departments we would like to see audited? I think we said that information
Right,
So,
right,
yeah.
right, yeah.
So and again, I'm not sure, to your point, I'm not sure what department would be heavier.
Can you, actually, can you share, how many commissioners you heard a response from?
Sure. So ultimately of the mayor and commission, I would say about 50% is the response rate, which is not atypical. Um, and I would say that of the topics generated by the mayor and commission, yes, of that 50%, code enforcement was one that was listed by multiple.
Mhm.
But the others were all sort of scattered in one office.
And one of the other things that Gavin and I have talked about also is, as you go through that process in the future, is he and I then having a conversation. There may be things that come up in the discussion with you all that are timely, relevant, and nuanced in a way that may not make it into the audit piece, but actually become part of what I look at from a management perspective. I won't go into the same kind of level of detail, but once we kind of know what it is, it's one thing to say, what departments of code enforcement, it's kind of that next layer. What about code enforcement? Because there may actually be a piece that actually isn't an audit piece that doesn't get picked up, but I can pick it up
Right.
or something
Yeah.
else. So I think that's a piece that maybe over the last couple of years, because the transition has gone on in the manager's office, we just haven't been able to do that.
And that's a great point by Bob, and I appreciate his willingness when we sit down to talk about those things, because yes, this list could easily be double every year. But when we start to look at what's being suggested by either the commission or across the county, a lot of those things are more questions or inquiries about something that we'll just pick up the phone and ask Bob.
Yeah.
You know, like he'll answer that within about 5 minutes. We don't need an audit to do that. And that's what he and I work together to try and decipher through is this truly an audit? Or is this more of just a managerial concern? So yeah, I'm looking forward to that and working with the manager on some of those topics.
I think we'll be able to leverage more progress in that way
correct.
too. So.
I'll step into this minefield.
All right.
What's going on with code enforcement? Or what's the
Well,
perception?
I'll give you my outside perception because I actually get, it's interesting because I actually get competing sort of perspectives. So one perspective is that there is a segment of the community that is more often a recipient of code enforcement activity. So, and they tend to be, obviously, I would think under that argument, they would tend to be folks that are have lower income, can't take care of their property as well, whatever it might be and stuff. Interestingly, though, the counter perspective is that in many ways, those same neighborhoods are suffering the consequences of not having enough code enforcement in there to make sure that properties are kept up and those kind of things. So I think that's the competing piece. Because I mean, I can tell you that overwhelmingly, don't have the data in front of me, I just know this anecdotally, overwhelmingly the recipients of code enforcement activities are young people that live in our community. I mean, they're students. Overwhelmingly, students are going to be the ones that are most often the targets, if you will, because code enforcement is a complaint-based activity, is how we operate it. And those are overwhelmingly complaints about parking violations, or trash violations, noise violations. So it's interesting because I actually hear kind of that sort of perception really at odds with each other. So that if I were actually saying, an audit piece would be to kind of tease out what are the actual facts associated with that, so that you could kind of cut through, because either one of those could be true. I don't know. I don't think that that's the case, but it could be true especially since we rely on a complaint basis. It could be that, okay, well, this particular area is where all the complaints are being driven. If you could tease it out, it would be interesting to find out who's making the complaints, because if the complaints are coming from within the neighborhood, like that probably seems to be a responsive code enforcement activity, but I think those are the ones that I've heard.
And I might question, following up on that, and this is not is it because it's complaint driven? We have 60% of the population who live in who rent, right? So are people who are renting or in multifamily developments, do they feel as empowered? Do they know about it? Everyone in my neighborhood knows about code enforcement, but to other people who are living in an apartment complex where the trash is not, those big containers are just overflowing and messy, do they know that they can call? And that's where it gets to me with the equity is, like as much between the homeowners and the people who are living in apartments and renting. So, you know, is this a service for the more well-off to complain about people? Or is it being used across the spectrum of Athens-Clarke County?
Yeah, and I've had this discussion with Doug at Hansford, and part of, to me, that's actually part of the reason to not solely rely on a complaint-based basis
Right.
for code enforcement, that you also do some proactive code
Yeah.
enforcement.
I'm
that's
sorry.
targeted.
The reason I'm laughing is I'm just sitting here thinking, as a former male student at the University of Georgia,
Yeah.
I can guarantee none of them are thinking about code enforcement
They're not,
when it comes to the garbage and other stuff.
they're not calling up and saying,
No.
hey, my neighbor, and
No.
yet therefore, that impact exists within certain neighborhoods that may or may not then be the beneficiary of code enforcement. And so part of the discussion I had with Doug is that because of that, there may need to be some kind of proactive combined with reactive complaint based.
Yeah.
And it has to be meaningful. I mean, it has to be focused because yes, I mean, I think we have whole areas of the city because of what you just described would actually never actually be, I'm going to say beneficiary, that's a nice way of saying it, a beneficiary of code enforcement, because there's just nobody's going to complain about it. And yet, if you and I drove out there and be, oh my gosh, look at what's going on here, there's code violations everywhere. And so,
Yeah.
And I've done it in my district. I've seen cars and stuff. I call code enforcement. That's how I stop by the neighbor's house. Knock on the door. You know, you got this junk car here. I'm really supposed to be here.
It's good for you to do that.
I know, but they don't like. I'm just saying. What I tell them is a violation.
Yeah.
You know, I just put it out there like that. I said it probably needs to be moved. You know, and I've done that, and actually it wasn't that bad. I done it twice. Again, I sort of picked my poison.
Yeah, yeah.
And stuff. So yeah, but yeah, I think it's to your point though, Carl. I think sometimes with the code enforcement, but sometimes now in my multifamily area where I get calls, especially if something going on inside a person's unit, I always preface them though. Code enforcement is not gonna come in unless you invite them in.
Mhm.
They're not gonna show up. A lot of times, the tenants do not let that happen because they're afraid of some repercussions
Yeah.
from the management. So we get that a lot, where there's a violation. It's clear the violation inside the apartment unit, but the tenant won't let them come in to look at it and report it.
So that's just one, but yeah, Ms. Higgins, did you?
Yeah, a couple comments. So, kind of just reviewing this challenge that we
Mhm.
have every year to go through this process of what
Mhm.
needs to be targeted. And, this is just a great effort to try and narrow down all the elements that have to do that. So my first question was on the duplication, column. And then I read on here what that means for duplication, and I was, trying to remember, with our previous efforts to collect previous audits and other efforts from that we captured that somewhere, didn't we? We captured,
Yes.
and so every year, I suppose, as we prepare for this too, that we go back and we ask and try and collect the audits from all the departments that have external evaluators, right? So
Yes.
that's not really in your duplication I was hoping that was in the duplication column, that would be the part that we might be considered, that we're not going to duplicate other audits from.
Well, that is part of it.
Is that part of the
Yes,
duplication?
that is, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that
Because
was,
you're correct. Staff maintains that list.
Mhm.
And, as you're even we'll talk about in a couple minutes, our effort to continue to keep you up to date on external
yeah, you have
audits
that
like
other
we were.
audit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but yes, that is.
That's part of that
reflected in scope.
duplication job.
That is
Okay, very
correct.
good. So, and then we go to the overall challenge of trying to create kind of an audit environment in the government, right? So, which is really, to me, the mission and function of internal and external audit is to have the expectation that, within a certain period of time that we can be at any time we can be looked at,
Sure.
of course, but during a period of time that we have expectation that we're going to go through this process, that we're going to be looked at by somebody else. And I think that's a really important thing to remember as we do this, that we are challenged by the amount of resources that we have to be able to do it.
Mhm.
And I can't stop commending you guys for what a great effort you've done these 3 years that we've really put a big chunk in what had been
Yeah.
really empty space for so long. But I'm not sure that we're getting to that point where we're achieving that environment, that audit environment, because there's just too much to look at, right? There's too much there that hasn't been looked at. And uh, there's just a risk there that we don't have enough comprehensive efforts to be able to do this. And this is the risk for the elected officials and for the management, that's still there. Because I don't think we've gotten there yet. I think we're getting there. I think
Yeah.
you are really making a huge effort. So my other point there was, and we had talked about it last year and the year before about getting external support for the ones that are just too much. And that's a budgeting issue. It's a resource issue. And it's also, I know that you would want to do every audit that we have here because
Yeah.
you guys do such a great job. So I just want to make that comment. The second comment is, that while we're doing these audits, we did have an emphasis on identifying internal controls that were in these organizations and identifying the areas of risk of these internal controls. So you identify where the risk is and then whether or not they have internal controls and whether they are following them. And I'm still concerned that we don't have a comprehensive internal control system under the manager's office to be able to capture that. So my feeling is that at least every year, every department, anybody that has any risk that requires internal control, so the financial transactions where they're made, where you don't have duplication of people doing,
Mhm.
money in, money out, that those are identified in
Yeah.
every organization, and that's checked every year. But that's a management issue. That's through the manager's office, not necessarily internal
Correct.
controls checked, so that they're there and the system is there and that it's done.
Mhm.
And that's your job to be able to identify that. But that really risks, it sits in the manager's office. And I know there are a lot of other things there that do capture some of that, but I don't think that we have, or at least I don't see a comprehensive system to identify. And it's really not a lot. I mean, you're talking about 2 or 3 points in every department where the thumb should be on the internal control part. And we have the financial audit every year, but they'll mention every time that financial audit, that's not their job to be able to identify that. They are going to identify whether they think appropriate internal controls are there on the financial side, where they're doing the books.
And actually the two things you're saying, one about the budgetary thing to have
Mhm.
someone else come in and do one, but then also the point that you're bringing up, which I remember in my initial tutorial on auditing with you 5 years ago, that we talked about that in terms of it coming out of the managers, this emphasis on that importance. And because I was thinking about the even, awareness of the culture. So if it is like having those expectations set by the manager that everyone has these internal controls.
Their internal control
Mhm.
system. Yeah.
Internal control system, and remember that we have this regular auditing. We want to make sure we're prepared for that. And even, sending a link of, I mean, I don't know, maybe everyone knows this and they're all on their, edge of their seats waiting to find out, but is everyone aware of the in the departments, really aware of all the audits that are going on and how, to create that reminder that that is happening and that
Mhm.
these are important. So I don't know what
Well, I'll certainly, and I think these points are certainly great to raise, and this is the time to do it. So a couple things, I will say that in previous conversations with the mayor, the understanding is that although we're never opposed to, an outside audit if necessary,
Mhm.
there is a department for a reason. That we have a significant budget, we have our staff, and the expectation is, although it may take a while to catch up a little bit, that in-house, this is why we're here, is to perform those functions without necessarily going to have to outsource those things as well. That said, we keep track internally as a department, obviously, which ones are paying to have external consultants come in and do the required audits. So we're well aware of that, and those are captured in this risk assessment. Is we are well aware of which ones are being looked at every 3 months, quarterly,
Mhm.
annually, and which ones just are off the books completely. And those are reflected in our scoring and our choices. I do think we are making a good dent. I think we are at a good pace that is certainly catching up and making a dent in what has not been completed yet. I do think that the way in which we audit with our periodic audits, given that it is not just a financial quick audit like you see at the end of the year with the finances, this is something that is unique to Athens in some ways. You know, the way we perform these, the way we look at it from a compliance and a performance standpoint, not just finance and internal controls. And it does take, I will say, some background knowledge in this government to be able to get through some of that haze and that fog of these different departments. So I think we're strategically in a good position to be able to perform these. And the culture has changed, I will say that. In my time here, outside of this office, I was one of those people that, oh my goodness, not another audit. Like, to the person now performing that, we have actually made contact with a number of the people on these lists. Let them know that they're on the list. You know, we don't know if it's going to be final yet or not, but just let you know you're on the list. I can't tell you how many of them was like, great, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the way that you come in with your team and audit us. This is beneficial. I have stood up at least 2, if not 3 times at managerial meetings prior to Bob's arrival and talked to the group of directors about what they can expect. I've gone to departments at their request and sat down with their division leaders and gone over the list of scope and objectives and being like, listen, I don't know when your audit's coming, but it will be. Here's what you need to be looking for, because this is what we're going to grade you on. So yes, I think there are improvements. Is it perfect? No, we will continue to work on it, but I do think there are some shifts happening though. So, and I appreciate, you know, what Ms. Higgins said about working with management, that some of this is outside of our scope. Naturally, we are not the implementers. We leave that to management. We are the fact finders. And so there are certain things that just have to be built into the culture and the expectation, and that comes from a different department.
And I would follow up this by saying to Bob that in his review, like as he's hearing this, like if he's looking at this going, hey, it would be really helpful for me to actually have, and this is like, this department needs to be audited, and somehow that's communicated, that would give, like, so if something came in here that was between you and the manager or whatever, that there was a real need to do something sooner than later on one of these, and you know, I advocate for that in terms of a budget item, if that was what was felt was really important. Now, just to get caught up so that we're ahead, maybe that's not as important. But if there is a sense of urgency, or that it would help the manager in terms of how the department runs, I would appreciate that information.
And that's part of the conversation that we have. And, you know, and I mean, for my part, it starts very simple in that I would always stress, for me, if I said, where would I want you to focus your attention? I'd say, pick the thing with the highest risk. I mean, that's because it has the greatest risk to me and to the organization, and ultimately to you all, as to, I'll use and say, I think, for example, central services ranks highest in the risk, and it's because of what they do and the kind of work that they are involved in. Not doing that well, doing it poorly, doing it whatever, has great consequence all the way up to being even up into the safety realm of things and stuff. Whereas if I contrast that with whether or not, because I really think this is the question, code enforcement. The real question of code enforcement is coming from the commission is, you know, are we really getting the kind of code enforcement we need in this organization? I mean, that's a very, very different question than, are there things that central services are doing and the way they're doing it that really could harm people or could actually cause X, Y, or Z.
Right.
I would put risk always at the top of that, at the top of that list. Probably that would follow financial risk, which is not really necessarily the purview of this piece. And that gets to the internal control piece, because to Gavin's point, I'm kind of used to a scenario with an internal auditor where, you know, 90% of their effort would be all of those kinds of routine financial checks, you know, cash audits, those kinds of things to make the internal controls in place. And then they would try to fit in one, at best, organizational assessment across the whole. Here, it's kind of turned on its head, which is perfectly fine. But I don't want to lose the fact that we still have a responsibility for those internal controls,
Mhm.
and we need to find a way
Yeah.
to deal with
Yeah, that piece has been missing for a long time, and I don't get it, because it's really not that hard.
it. Yeah, I mean, they're usually, you think of things like, the police handle a certain amount of cash, sometimes in very interesting ways. Your parks folks might handle a certain amount of cash that there could be internal controls with that aren't going to really be subject to your external audit because
Right.
it's not on the same books and stuff. And those things are usually, you've got internal controls relative to contracts and payments on contracts. Those are where you're going to get your kind of petty theft and also embezzlement kinds of things and have that risk associated with it. So, but are not, they have to be deliberately made a part of some kind of check with it. Otherwise, they will not get checked. They won't get checked by an organizational assessment necessarily, and they won't get checked by the external audit.
Right, exactly.
And there is, again, always room for improvement. I'm never going to say we're foolproof, but some of the internal controls, I think that Ms. Higgins, you're talking about, are there. They're not advertised, but I mean, we just sat down a couple of weeks ago, actually, with the finance department, the accounting division, to discuss just that and how some of those internal controls are applied across the board with regard to petty cash, account management, things like that. And that was an 1.5 hour long meeting. And, again, for our own knowledge going forward, to your point, what are the areas that we as an organization maybe need to focus on a little bit more? But we also left that meeting very confident in some ways that those internal controls are happening. There are annual internal audits by our finance department of every department's cash handling and account management and things like that, that are separate even from the annual audit that we do from our finances. So yeah.
What I'm focusing, I know that we do have a lot of internal controls, and I know reading the reports that you have from a lot of things that you focus on that, and you look that they have them and they are doing them. So I know that we do. What we don't have is an internal control system. So what we don't have is a system that the manager and the elected officials can be assured that every year these internal controls are being looked at and applied. We don't have a system that he can. You see what I'm saying? When you go down in deep and you say, oh, good, the tax payments for the airplanes at the air freight are there, and that money's going back to the airport the way it's supposed to, and blah, 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 right? When you check that, you can see it, but there's no system that catches, and there's really probably, I would say 1,000, off the top of my head, specific internal controls where you have, especially this, like, as you were mentioning, the smaller departments, the smaller areas where you have not enough people to be able to do segregation of duties. And so, that's a red flag. So you got to have an extra internal control to make sure that doesn't happen. For the contracts and the big things, the embezzlement, the ones you've seen in big organizations, and it's never really publicized very well. You have to dig and find it.
Sure.
Where you have sometimes, the famous case up in where it wasn't Austin, it was Asheville. So actually involving the auditor actually got involved in the big scam with money that was going to the airport, right? And so I was doing the airport stuff, and I saw this. I couldn't believe it. It was such an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And it was hundreds of thousands of dollars that got diverted, and people literally went to jail on that one, right? So the emphasis, you're never going to have 100% control on all these things, but you have to have that reasonable assurance that these things are there. And so if the manager has a system that, these, at least the checks are done and the checks are sent up, every year, Leisure Services, has completed their internal control. And when you go and audit, you have that already that they're doing it. They might not actually be doing it. They might be just checking the box and saying they're doing it, but at least you have something that goes up at that level. So a system is what I'm looking for. A system that says we've identified all these spots where we have a problem that needs internal control, and somebody's checking that every year, whether it's an external person or internal auditors, the office itself. This is what we're missing. And it is funny because we do have a very special internal audit system, and we've had that discussion before in terms of how it works, and our very special audit committee, which works on the work plan for the internal audit. And that's also kind of funny because that's normally an audit committee, normally in government functions, does the audit function for the government, not just the internal audit. Internal audit's a component of what the audit committee would look at. But we're different here in Athens, and this is the way we've done it. And actually right now it's working really, really well, so So I just, we have to kind of look at it in context. Right? Yeah.
No, I appreciate it. Well, y'all, again, in between now and the next meeting, please look at some of those topics and let me know if you have any questions or other concerns. So, but
Creating the, firm.
yeah, I'm gonna go through this in 5 minutes because I know that's what we got. So, staff is working on the budget at the moment. Don't anticipate any major changes from last year. I think the directive is again to try and hold the line, this upcoming year. From a Peace Corps standpoint, we spent, almost 80 hours in October on Peace Corps, but that dropped down to about 30 in November just because of the holidays, vacations, and there wasn't a Peace Corps meeting to begin with. From a schedule standpoint, one thing I would ask from y'all is to cancel our January meeting, which is typical because that is on
Yeah,
Here.
the day of New Year's, and just meet as we typically do that first time in February. So, does anyone want to make a motion with regard to that?
We'll move.
Okay.
Second.
all in favor of moving our January 1st meeting to February, date on the February, what?
5th.
February 5th. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Okay, and I know we won't be able to get into it, but again, I just wanted to emphasize that we're trying to, again, communicate to Ms. Higgins' point earlier about external audits that are happening and then that we're made aware of and collecting. The one in front of you from the Boys and Girls Club is just one such example. And I think we can certainly keep that on the agenda for next meeting if you have any more additional questions about it, but this is more for reference and informative. This isn't anything that the audit committee necessarily takes action on. But does anybody have any questions just right off the bat?
I do have a just question in terms of process, how, and this might be the manager more than anything, how an audit such as this one is, I don't know, operate, like how it affects operation with HCD or future, does it have implications?
Yes, it does. In this case, so there's a couple different audits that are done, with our, what I'll refer to as kind of outside agencies. So folks that we provide some kind of financial support for. Obviously, if it goes over a certain dollar threshold, $1 million threshold, we're required to do that. There aren't very many of those that fit that. But with ARPA funding, there were more of those than what were before. And so, for example, in this case, when that audit was completed by, and it's not our audit, it was audit for Boys and Girls Club, but when we were provided, even before it was completed, the auditor was corresponding with HCD staff to make certain that they were aware of the findings and honestly, partly fact gathering and stuff. And so I'll make up some number and say there were like 7 critical findings in there. And I would say probably through that process, 5 of those HCD was already aware of. Boys and Girls Club was already working on resolving those. There were a couple though that audit revealed they were not aware of, particularly conflict of interest provisions. So that, in this case, that did cause them then to reach back out. In this case, the Boys and Girls Club saying, we need some additional documentation to kind of, you got your audit and you're going to have to respond to that, but we've also got our responsibilities and we need to move into that piece. So yes, it does affect, even though it's not, in this case, not our audit, it was not associated with our external auditor. The fact that we were made aware of those deficiencies causes us to have to take some actions that went forward. And so, I mean, all of that is formally communicate with them. So they have to submit formal plans to address those issues. Very similar to the first time that the Boys and Girls Club had some findings as we went through. And in this case, we'll get those periodically. In this case, this was also significant. I had forwarded it, of course, to the mayor and commission, also much as Gavin has done here too, because I knew you all would be getting questions from folks about it as well. And it's a public record.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was already, I think the day I sent it to the commission, it had already been requested in open records from somebody in the community of the Boys and Girls Club and stuff. Now there are, just so you all know, there are funders out there that we're either we fund or we may have some other relationship with that are getting audits done all the time that we're not privy to. And Chamber of Commerce gets audited, the ADBA gets audited. They have their own boards and their own
Hospital authority.
Yeah. So just so you know, those audits are out there. We don't always.
Right.
The only reason we saw this one is because we had a direct financial involvement with them.
So is it, I mean, Are we getting money going back from Boys and
We
Girls Club?
are, and matter of fact, there's so much money that is coming back, to be honest, it's actually affecting their core mission. Because they're taking ARPA dollars, spending those, and if it's found that they spent them on activities that were not allowed, which certainly the audit indicated, they then have a repayment plan that they put in place, which we've accepted, and they're giving us those dollars back. The only way they can give us those dollars back is taking it from their donations and stuff that would otherwise go to services. So the way in which they have been managing this program is affecting their ability to deliver their mission.
And I think we had a couple resignations associated with
They
this,
gotta check, yeah, they gotta change it. Actually, the CEO has to run it.
and the finance,
With the new CEO,
and the finance officer
Yeah,
resigned.
and the financial person.
the new financial person,
Well, I'm not sure how new she was, but I know
the woman, she's been there for like 6 months or so?
Yeah, she
Yeah,
resigned.
she resigned, then the CEO as Friday would be her last day.
Last Friday, so she's done. The day after Thanksgiving or this
Yeah,
Friday?
but letter wise, on paper, tomorrow is her last day.
Okay,
Yeah, that's why our meeting got canceled.
okay.
One quick thing I just wanted to state, before we adjourn, I just wanted to take the time to thank Lippy, in our office, who was primary on both the org structure and the HR follow-up, and unfortunately, Lippy is moving on.
Yeah.
And,
Bigger and better
we
things.
are happy for her, and we are, wanting to congratulate her, and I just want to let you all know that this would be her last meeting with you all, but
Oh, thank you.
she
Good
has
luck
been a
with you.
wonderful
Thank you so
asset
much for
to
this.
our department and to this group, and so I just want to thank Libby for her service.
Thank you.
All right, that's all I had. Sure.
All right, I get a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, thank you all. Don't stay happy holidays. See everybody.
Okay, good.
In February.
February,
Okay,
everybody have
see
a
you
wonderful
then.
holiday.
Yeah.
Where are you going? Where are you
I'm
going?
moving. Oh, yes.
Let me.
I'll let the whole world know.
Yeah.